This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the Journey Step-by-Step Christian Podcast, and I'm your host, Karyn Beach. It's Karyn Beach with another episode of the Journey Step-by-Step Christian Podcast. And I think all of you would agree that we are on a journey, and if you take a real journey, and let's get old school, you're not on a plane, you're not even in a car, but you're walking, you're going to come across some kind of sketchy areas on that journey. You're going to end up walking at night when it's dark through a creepy, spooky area, because that's how journeys are. Just like there's great, awe-inspiring scenery at some points, there are some areas where, for me, because I'm not a big fan of heights, if I was walking through the mountains on a really narrow path, that would be scary for me. And those are times when we have to realize that we're not walking alone. We're walking with the Lord, not even your best friend, but you're walking with the Lord. And that if you realize that, you start to realize that you're going to be okay, that this part of the journey is going to end at some point. And while you're going through it with Him. And He's going to make sure that no weapon formed against you will prosper. He's going to make sure you're okay. And right now, I think it's important that we remember that, because we are going through such a tumultuous time with, first it was COVID-19, then it was George Floyd and everything going on with that. A fourth of people, including myself, are out of work, and what does that mean? That means, on a very real note, that I lost my job on St. Patrick's Day. By the 1st of April, it wasn't an April Fool's joke to find out that I no longer had health insurance. And that's true for a lot of us. So we're going through a very scary time. And the person I have to talk to about that, to give a perspective on part of our scary time, is David Essel. Okay. David Essel. He's been on here before. If you've listened before, and we had a show about being a rock star, but we weren't talking about rock music. So go back and listen to that episode if you didn't hear it before. But David was here talking about that. And so when he came back, I said, David, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to chat about? And we talked about the fact that although a lot of people use the Bible to justify a lot of things, really, there is no racism in the Bible. It is very clear that there is no racism. And people will say, well, Karyn, what about slavery? There was slavery in the Bible. There was slavery during that time, and so the Bible addresses that. The Bible never says, go get a bunch of slaves. It doesn't address that. It does deal with the fact that slavery existed at the time. And when you look at the number of people that were Christians, when you look at the size of the Jewish population, a lot of times, they weren't in a position to make changes. So when they wrote about the real world. But I was talking to David and I said, so what do you want to chat about? And he said, what if Jesus was Black? And now I'm going to stop, because probably a handful of people just turned this off. Just said, oh, heck no. And we're not talking about, personally, I don't know if Jesus had a color. In the Bible, it does say he had hair like wool. which is what I would have, what I had a couple weeks ago before I got back to the salon. Let's be honest. But we want to talk about that because so many people would look at the Bible differently if they saw Jesus as a person of color. And we need to realize before we get in this conversation, it doesn't matter if he was a person of color or not. When we get to heaven and we see Jesus, we all might be surprised, or maybe we won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you have in your heart. What happens is how you show your love for God in what you do. The Bible does say you will know him by his fruits. So what are your fruits? What are you showing? That's the important thing. But for this conversation, we're going to talk about just what if Jesus was a person of color?
Karyn, I love this. I just wrote an article yesterday that is being sent out all over the world now. And the article was, how would the race relations in the United States and the world be different if we could prove that Jesus Christ was Black? Now, as a minister, I love this, because I'm very open-minded. My sermons are incredibly open-minded. And from the book Rockstar, we took the life of a rock and made it this deep spiritual journey with God. And so we have the power to do this. And, now I'm going to back up a little bit. I was raised in a very powerful family filled with faith. At 10 years of age, my mom and dad, we lived in Syracuse, New York. They brought Michael, a 10-year-old Black child from New York City, in what's called the Fresh Air Fund. They brought him from New York City up to Syracuse to be with us for the summer. The neighborhood went nuts. They couldn't stand that my family did that. Now, I'm 64 years of age, so we're talking 54 years ago. The world was much worse then in regards to prejudice, stereotypical responses from people than it is today. But today, in my opinion, Karyn, it sucks. I still think it sucks. I think the relations between Blacks and whites has nothing to do with Blacks and whites. I think it has to do with people in power. I think it has to do with control. I think we've been fed this malarkey that Blacks are not equal to whites. And so I wanted to write an article and go, how would we view this if all of a sudden we came with the proof anthropologically, which they have come up with some proof in the past that Jesus was a man of color. They said he had dark olive skin. He could be completely Black, for God's sake. And I love that thought, because how would it be different? How would whites look at Blacks if Jesus Christ was Black? I can tell you, baby, it would be totally different than the way many do today.
Honestly, I think if Jesus was proved to be Black way back in the day when Christianity was starting, I wonder would it even have taken hold?
Oh, you know what? I think we'd have to look at his power, and I think the answer would be yes, it would have. Anyone that can raise people from the dead, anyone that could that can put mud on blind people's eyes and they see, I think he'd be accepted quite well. I still think he'd be crucified. I don't care if he was Asian, Hispanic, Black, white. I still think all that's going to happen because he threatened power, Karyn. He threatened the people in power. And let me make this comment, and I'm getting chills right now. If you're a white person, if you've ever had an extremely negative attack by a Black man or a Black woman, you may have a reason to be afraid. But if you've never had that, you have no reason other than social conditioning to be afraid of anyone of any different color. There's no rationale behind this. Now, if you're a Black person and you were attacked by a white person, which I'm so sorry for everyone that has been going back in time, well, then a Black person would have a reason to be afraid of a white person.
But and even in that situation, you are making a choice to have that fear. When my dad grew up in the segregated South, his oldest sister, my Aunt Catherine, the man that ran the house, the main house where the sharecroppers lived, right. He asked my grandfather, he said, I want Catherine to come up and work in the house. And my grandfather knew what that meant, and so he said no. And so this man would sit on his porch and shoot at my grandmother and my aunt when they went to the well to get water, just to try to make people afraid. Now, here's the rub. Even though that happened, even though at some point the members of the Ku Klux Klan burned down their house and my grandfather had to literally break in to get my Aunt Louise, there's a lot of them, there's like 11 of them, out of the house, my father raised me in an integrated community. My father had friends that were white, that were black. I remember his one friend, this Italian guy. I remember clearly playing with his daughters and everything, Al, when I was a little girl. And if there's somebody that should have been angry, if there's somebody that should have been upset, if there's somebody who could have rightly been racist, it was my dad, but he wasn't. He made a choice to do what MLK suggested, and that is to judge people by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin.
Right. And your father is a very powerful man to be able to do that. The example that I gave earlier about if you were ever harassed by a black person and you were white, or you were harassed by a white person and you were black, that happens. But it's a tiny percentage of the world's population. You know, like 80% of white people in the United States have not been harassed by black people, okay? But if you look at the way the administration is talking, and administration is talking about people of color, not just black, Hispanic, everything in the world, right? It's like we have created division through, once again, people in power, not between blacks and whites. This isn't a black and white issue. It's a power position issue that's creating division amongst the people. You know, when I, at 10 years of age, when Michael came up and stayed with us for the summer, I loved him. He was scared as hell to be with a white family. I'll tell you that. He was rigid for the first couple days, 4 or 5 days. He didn't smile. He didn't talk much. He was totally out of place. Within a period of time, he let his guard down and he saw that we were loving, that we liked him. And then we didn't want him to go, you know, like we didn't want him to leave and he didn't want to leave. And it was a beautiful experience. Now, that's the way it should be in the perfect world, is that we should be able to look at people, you know, and let me tell you something interesting, Karyn. 2 weeks ago on Facebook, I put, I don't see color. I see people. And I really believe that. You know, in the gym, when I'm walking around, I'm looking in people's eyes. I'm not going, oh, there's a black person, there's an Asian, there's a Hispanic. I look in their eyes. I smile at everyone. I talk to everyone who wants to talk to me. I don't look at, but what was interesting is that when I put that, is that I got pushback. I got pushback from blacks saying, that's bullshit. You're telling me you can't see my skin. And I said, no. I said, I can't see a color differentiation. In other words, all I see is human beings. And that's how I'm going to continue to live my life this way. There is no one, Karyn, that could interfere with my belief systems about my equality with blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. We are all the same. You know, I have good friends, Keith Mitchell, former NFL All-Pro linebacker with the New Orleans Saints. I love Keith to death. I could go on and list 1,000 black friends of mine, some with a lot of big positions of wealth and power and position, and others just everyday people that I don't consider them different, you know, but the powers that be do, the powers, you know, if you have a corrupt cop, black or white, you've got problems because they hold a lot of power. You have a politician who is corrupt from the segregation prejudice, we have a problem. And that's what we're facing in this country. It's not blacks and whites that are the problem. It's the people in power that continue to tell us that there's a problem. Karyn, there's no problem. There is no problem between blacks and whites other than the people in control trying to tell us there is and keep us separate.
I will challenge that a little, and that there is, with some people who are rank and file, you and me type of people, have fully bought into what the powers that be say. And I remember growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, there were parts of Cleveland that I was told I better not be in after dark.
Sure.
And it's because the people, even though these people in Parma didn't have power, they believed the people in power. And because of that, they believed that Black people were different, that Black people meant them harm.
That's exactly what I'm saying. We're saying the same thing. Okay. It's not the people. It's the people in power that are putting belief systems that are full of crap into our brains. Now, true. You know, I played basketball for my whole life, and I played 2 years at Syracuse University. I played with Black guys all the time. They were best freaking friends of mine. You know, it's like, yeah, I counseled a couple. The guy was white, the woman was Black, and I counseled them for years, and they were married, you know, because they put up with so much crap from society. And I kept saying to them, you know what, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but the people that are giving you a hard time in the streets, they're doing it because someone above them fed them this nonsense. We're not born prejudiced. We're taught to be prejudiced. We're not born saying that Blacks are inferior, whites are superior. That's a bunch of crap. We're born with a clean slate that says you are loved. You put two children together that have not been influenced by idiotic parents, and you're going to see love. You put teenagers together that are different colors that haven't been influenced by idiotic people in their neighborhoods, you're going to see love. But the minute you see the people within power, now power means role models, it means people of influence. That's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about power from you have to be super wealthy to influence. You could be a dirtbag. And if you continue to preach certain nonsense, stereotypical values, you'll eventually find people that will agree with you, only because of the fact that maybe you have a microphone. You know, if you go on YouTube and you look at the white supremacist and the racist BS that goes on there, a lot of them get followers from people that are searching, who have no confidence in life, no self-esteem. And that's a huge percentage of our population. And they're easily swayed, Karyn.
Or people that are having a hard time and are looking for someone to blame. I went to college and a guy told me, well, you shouldn't be here because, you know, my friend should have gotten in and he should have been here. And I'm like, and my professor was just smiling and looking at me the whole time. He was like, Karyn, do you have anything to say? I said, yes, your friend probably isn't as smart as me. in the discussion. And you know, and unless the government's name is George Beach, I didn't take any money from your friend to get here. Yeah. You know, so but people want someone to blame. They want someone to scapegoat.
That's right.
And you know, to put this back into a faith-based discussion, you know, that's not what Jesus was about. Jesus wasn't about that at all. He was not in anything. He said, you're supposed to stand up to injustice. You're supposed to stand up to oppression. And I do another podcast, Fun, Feisty, Fabulous for women over 40. And my co-host, she's visiting her BFF. She's Black like me, but she's visiting her BFF, a white girl in Washington State, where she used to live. And they've had protests. The interesting thing about their protest is there are very few people of color in Washington State.
Right.
So there's this huge protest filled with people that aren't people of color, people that see what's going on and see the injustice and see the oppression, and they're speaking up about it. Now, all of us go through hard times, but what's difficult to do is to turn that camera around on yourself and figure out what you can do to be different, to be better. that's something that needs to be in your prayer life. Lord, what can I do? Where is it that I'm falling short? Where is it that I need to be focused? Instead of saying what's easy, well, it's your fault that I didn't get into this college. It's your fault that I didn't get into this house or this job. Instead, looking within and asking God to shine a light on what you can do differently. That's what people don't do. It's so much easier to look on the outside and blame someone else.
You know, if you want to look at the most powerful people in the world, and let's say Christians, the most powerful Christians would never judge someone, period. And if they did, they would catch themselves and they go, oh man, that was a mistake. Even if they just said it to themselves, so, if you call yourself a Christian and you have a problem with blacks, Hispanics, Asians, you got some work to do, honey, because that's not the Christian walk. And I know there's a lot of super conservative Christian churches that are filled with white supremacists that are teaching ideology that's absolute nonsense. And to me, that's not a Christian church. It's not. And, for all the quote unquote Christian pastors that are following our president in talking about people of color and telling people of color who are in the administration to go back to their homelands when 2 of the 3 were born in the freaking United States of America, that's just white supremacist arrogance. That is a statement of arrogance, Karyn. And if Trump was standing in front of me right now, I'd say the same thing to his damn face. He has divided and our country at such a hellacious level. Now, I'm a minister and it sounds like I'm judging him. And guess what? I am. Because I really feel what you said a second ago. When you see injustice and you don't do anything, you're part of the problem. If you're apathetic, you're a huge part of the issue. If you can't stand up for someone of a different color and protect them and support them if they're being harassed in any form whatsoever, you're filled with apathy. That's not what it's like to be a great Christian. A Christian is supposed to stand with the power of God within them and do what's right. And doing what's right is not always easy.
It's not always easy. It's not always convenient. And there's a quote by one of my favorite authors. She happens to be a Black woman from the 30s, Zora Neale Hurston. And she says something to the effect, I was looking for it, I couldn't find it. It amazes me that racists don't like me based on the color of my skin. I mean, why wouldn't you like to? Why are you denying yourself the pleasure of my company?
I love it.
And that's, when I look at my life, I'm a cook. I'm a big home cook. I cook literally 1 or 2 times a day, at least. And there are so many good foods that come from all over the world. Mm-hmm. I just looked at a recipe for empanadas. I just made Italian pasta the other day. When you deny yourself the pleasure of knowing people that don't look like you. I mean, I used to, and she moved, but I would love to find another salsa teacher so I could salsa dance again. There's so much that God has put on this earth that we can take part in and enjoy. And, God came that we can not only live life, but live it abundantly. And to be able to experience another person's culture, learn another person's language, their style of dance, what they eat. There are so many great things that exist outside of your narrow whatever your history, your background is. There's so much outside of it. God has created so many different people, so many different experiences that we could all enjoy if we got together and enjoyed it. And instead of, pointing fingers and placing blame, if we just got together and if everybody bought a dish. I make some mean collard greens, so I can bring my collard greens. Someone brings their empanadas. Somebody made some sausages. We could have a good time dancing and singing and learning, even if it's just Christian music. So many of us have a different type of music. We have a different way of praising. And to just be able to enjoy the different people that God has put together. He's given us all of this, not to hate and not to, segregate, but to enjoy as one people. Because, if you got hit by a car tomorrow, David, maybe I'm the one that can give you blood.
That's right.
There's no difference between us. When you take away the skin, we're all the same.
Yeah. Karyn, this is so important. And so while I like to go out on the edge and I like to write articles and do my sermons on topics that might make people think deeper, I believe if we ever did find out that Christ was Black, I think it would create this most incredible opportunity for people to change. It's almost like if it wasn't for Dr. Martin Luther King, and I don't know if there was anyone else at his time that had his power, his wisdom. If it wasn't for Nelson Mandela, I don't know who else at his time had his power and his wisdom. We wouldn't see the examples of powerful Black men unifying Blacks and whites. I mean, that's all they did. They devoted down. That doesn't mean that they were angels. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories of Dr. Martin Luther King and him doing stuff on the side that wasn't kosher.
He was a player.
He was a player. And Nelson Mandela, he didn't get 27 years in prison because he missed altar boy practice. He got 27 years in prison because he blew up white buildings. That's how he got 27 years in prison. But his 27 years in prison, because he was with the African National Congress on the peacemaking side first. And when they didn't get the movement momentum they needed, he switched to the terrorist side of the ANC. That's how he got put into jail. But when he was in prison, he reformed himself. He became born again. And I'm not even saying from a Christian perspective, I mean from a mind perspective. He started to make friends with the guards who spoke Afrikaans. And Afrikaans was the white, and still is the Dutch language of Africa, South Africa, right? The guys, his ANC partners who were in prison with him, were so pissed at him for making friends with the white guards and learning their language because it was so different than his own language. And he had to go back every day and go, "You're not seeing the bigger picture. I'm doing this because when I get out of here, I'm going to be the ruler of South Africa." And of course, you can imagine what his brothers in jail are thinking, right? This guy is insane. He's not going to be the president of South Africa. And sure enough, he was. But let's look at the truth of this, Karyn. He could never have done it if he didn't feel equal to whites and if he didn't make both whites and Blacks believe that there were errors made in Africa's history. He could never have been elected. He was able to touch every color of skin in Africa to get elected. And, that's what I put on Facebook the other day. I need someone to be channeled through by Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. I put that on Facebook. I wish we could find someone to be channeled, that they could be channeled through, that they could take the reins of these powerful men. It could be a Black woman for all I care. I don't care. I just think we need, this show is really important, Karyn. What you're doing right now is really important. There would be a lot of people that would be afraid to have me on their show to talk about this because it goes against the power principles that we have accepted in this world, that somehow Blacks are not equal to white. It goes totally against what we've been raised with. Now, there's a certain part of the population that has evolved, like you and I. We've evolved to love each other. On Facebook the other day, when I saw all this craziness about Blacks versus white, I said, in big, bold letters on Facebook, I said, I love my brothers, Keith Mitchell, Wilbur Powell, Ty Jackson, just like I love anyone else. Now, Keith, Wilbur, and Ty are all great friends of mine who are Black. And I put it right there, man. I'm going to stand up there. I'm not as powerful as Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. I have a small voice compared to them. but I'm going to use whatever voice I have on social media, on your show, and anywhere else I can to go back to unification, to go back to what Martin and Nelson and all these other people in the Rosa Parks, for God's sake, all these people have been trying to teach us. We're ignorant, Karyn. We're an ignorant freaking society. America is filled with ignorance. And the only way you shatter ignorance is with love and truth. And you put love and truth together. And I believe, Karyn, I'm speaking the truth to you right now. I am speaking from the heart of all hearts. I was raised to love all people. I am not changing. There is no one in the world that's going to convince me that you or an Asian or a Hispanic is any lower than me or anyone else in this world. We need people to stand up and be powerful voices. Do I get crap? Yes, I get crap. Do I get pushback? Hell yeah, I get pushback. Bring it on, because we're doing the work of God. I'm not benefiting. I don't get paid to be on your show. I don't get paid to write these articles. I'm doing it because I love the life God has given me. He's given me a platform as a minister, an author, and a speaker. And if I don't use my damn platform, I am wasting God's gifts. And I ain't wasting one of the gifts he gave me. Not one, sister.
And that's so true that, when you speak up, when you speak out, you are doing the work of God. You are doing what Jesus told us to do. And to harbor hate in your heart. I was at Walmart earlier today and I was leaving and there was a girl pushing a cart, and I waved and smiled because, like you, I wave and smile at everybody.
Yeah.
And she kind of scowled at me. And she was another Black woman. So there was no race thing. But I'm just thinking, what heaviness must exist in your heart for you to be that unhappy that you can't return a smile and a wave? What heaviness must exist in your heart for you to have this anger and hatred towards whole groups of people for no reason other than they don't look like you?
Well,
it's sad.
It doesn't logically make sense, Karyn, right? And then we have to remember something very powerful. We are driven by the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind. And I'm going to talk about this briefly. So the conscious mind is the mind of intent. And let's say that the listeners right now are in agreement with us. And let's say they understand that there's no separation between black, white, yellow, pink, whatever. Gay, bisexual, transgender. We could throw everyone into this pile. I love them all.
Male, women, binary, non-binary, everybody.
It's like, but we've been influenced. And so if you're raised in a household from 0 to 18 where negative things were spoken about whites or blacks or Asians or Hispanics, that goes into the back of your mind, the subconscious portion of the mind. So imagine this. You don't have control from 0 to 18 over what goes in. Your subconscious mind is a sponge. So you can even have a mom or a dad, black or white, who's prejudiced and who hates whites or hates blacks. And you could say, when I grow up, I'm not going to be like that. But if you were in that environment from 0 to 18, it's going to be a bear to not be like that. Okay. It's going to be very hard. It's not that you can't, but it's going to take effort. Now, let's move it to another cycle. Let's go up higher. All of a sudden, you have interaction with police, and it's not healthy. Now, those messages are dug in deeper. And let's say that you go to college, and some ignorant person makes a comment like they made to you. If you haven't learned how to balance the conscious mind and the subconscious and to let this crap go, it's going to be another straw on the camel's back. And those straws keep adding up, and they start at 0 the day you're born. And they'll never end if you're not doing the work to remove those straws of prejudice, of righteousness. If you don't consciously remove them, and that's part of your subconscious, you're going to have a hard time accepting people that don't look or act like you do. But here's the great news. I was a raging alcoholic for 30 years. I've been sober a long time. Anything is possible. There are white supremacists. There are Ku Klux Klan former members who now preach love.
Right.
If you have one person who used to be a white supremacist and now is teaching love, that tells us that 7 billion people have the opportunity to make the same change. It ain't a genetic change, baby. It's a conscious mind change.
And this is where I feel that God making me as stubborn as I've been all my life was a good thing. You know, I never bought into the clean plate club. I'm like, I'm not hungry. I'm not eating it. So if somebody told me something stupid, I'd be like, I'm not listening to you.
Right.
So I don't think a lot of those things, if they did occur, really stuck to me. But it's funny how you mentioned that, because my parents told the story to me about when we were in this shows you how old it is, or how old I am. We were at Howard Johnson's. Do you remember Howard Johnson's? And there was a little boy at the other table about the same age as me. And he kept popping up and looking back at us, popping up and looking back. And, you know, everybody thinks that's cute when kids do that. Well, the last time he did it, he looked at his dad and said, "Are those niggers?" And his father went and got him down. But that is the type of kid that grew up with that subconscious thinking in the back of his head that he's going to have to overcome. I hope that he has, but at some point you need to challenge those beliefs. And I would ask people to really read the word and look at what it says. It doesn't say anything about racism.
That's right.
Slavery happened because Ham saw Noah naked and he cursed them, and that's why Black people are slaves. And even as a kid, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And then I got older and I looked at it and I'm like, it didn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. And if you look at things and you think and you look at them for yourself, not because somebody told you, but especially when it comes to the word and the word of God, ask and pray for wisdom, pray for clarity, because God will give it to you. Absolutely. And when you read it, you're going to see the same thing Karyn saw. That doesn't make sense. That's not what that says.
And Karyn, I'd like to add this too. For anyone who might still be with us that has a prejudiced mindset, I would like to ask them to pray for forgiveness for themselves. Forgiveness for the erroneous upbringing that fed me these messages. Forgiveness for the erroneous professors that taught me this nonsense. Forgiveness for my role models that I chose incorrectly and followed their advice. You know, we need forgiveness in order to move forward. I think also, you know, in my work as a counselor, I have people do this in writing. If you're a prejudiced person, I don't care if you're prejudiced against Blacks, white, Hispanic, Asian, gay, transgendered, it doesn't matter to me. What I would say is do it in writing and think about the times that you judge someone and write it down. God, I remember when I was in Walmart and there was this Black woman ahead of me and she did A, B, C, D, E, and she took too much time. And I was underneath my breath, I'm thinking, that damn Black woman. Write it down. God, please forgive me when I was talking to myself about that Black woman. God, please forgive me at work the other day when we were joking about Black Lives Matter. God, please forgive. In other words, we can't just, I don't believe as a minister that we do this universal, forgive me whatever I've done, God, and it's done. I think we got to go with humility, with vulnerability, and with specifics. And I also believe, Karyn, it can't be done in your head. If you're going to talk to God about forgiveness, put it in writing so you see in the physical world on paper the errors you've made in judgment against Blacks, whites, Asians, Hispanics. Then it gets real. If you and God are having a conversation and he sees your notepad and it has 20 times that you judge someone erroneously, it's going to make a difference in your life when you can see it and go, oh my God, and I did it there, and I did it there, and I agreed.
Can I just put, if I do this, can I just do a blanket statement that just says every time I'm in the car? Every time I'm in the car and someone cuts me off or gets in front of me, it happened today. I'm like, why aren't you driving? Car in front of me. Do you not see all these people going? And I don't know if I can think of every single time that I've been like, and God help me. I live in North Carolina, 10 minutes from South Carolina, and I am convinced that those people in that state can't drive. And that's something I need to work on. I know, because every time, and it happened today, I'm like, South Carolina plates. Yeah, should have known. But that's that's something I need to work on, because Lord, forgive me.
Karyn, I can make it really easy for you. At the end of every day, sit down with your piece of paper and say, did I judge anyone today harshly? And do it just do it every day, like a journaling technique. God, please forgive me for harshly judging the South Carolina drivers. I just did it today when I was going to Walmart. If you do it regularly, it'll have an impact. But if you wait,
I can do that. I can do that because because I'm like, should have known. South Carolina, right in front of me. Yeah. But and people from South Carolina, I'm not saying anything bad about you. This is something that's within me that I'm working on. South Carolina people, please continue to listen to my show.
Yeah, we love South Carolina.
I mean, like, people are like, well, you can get a cheaper house in South Carolina. I'm like, yeah. And as soon as that license plate goes on my car, I forget how to drive. That's what I believe.
When we get off the phone, you got some writing to do, girl.
Yeah, I have a lot of writing to do to my fans, my supporters in South Carolina. I'm so sorry, but I have to be honest and truthful in that I have a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah.
So if you're from South Carolina, I apologize to you specifically. If you're in TKK or Fort Mill, chances are we've come across each other. So I'm sorry.
All right. And, when you come with a open heart, a vulnerable heart, I believe in my work that you're instantly forgiven. I really believe that. Now, if you are forgiven and you repeat it and you don't come back again and ask for forgiveness, then it doesn't hold.
Well, here's my question. Like, how many times, well, I know the Bible says 70 times 7, but like every time I do something, I'm like, God, again, I did it. I'm sorry. I am sorry, but I mean, because there are a lot of South Carolina drivers.
You still got this South Carolina thing. But let me make this, I'll make a broader point. So I was working with a gentleman who was a client of mine, and this is when I'm wearing my counselor's hat, and he had multiple affairs on his wife. And he came to me and said, well, you're not just a counselor, you're a minister as well. And I said, yes. And he goes, I really need to be forgiven for my affairs. And I said, well, you're going to have to go to God to that. I don't forgive people. I don't have that power. And he said, well, what is your thought about this? And now he was dead serious, Karyn, so don't start laughing too hard. But he said, what if I ask God for forgiveness for the past affairs and only have an affair again if my wife refuses to do A, B, C, D, E? And I said, well, let me think about that. You're asking God to forgive you for the past, but you're asking him to give you a free pass for the future. I don't think it works like that. I think if you want to be forgiven, you have to stop the activity that is putting you in a position to ask for forgiveness. Is absolution possible? Hell yes, I believe so. I think you can be absolved 100% from murdering someone if you come with a vulnerable, open heart and you don't repeat the pattern. So, when I was an alcoholic, I made mistakes all the time that I would ask for God for forgiveness for, and I believe I was forgiven, and then I go freaking do it again. Well, over time, I said, well, wait a minute. Am I really being forgiven? Is this a game within my own head? I wanted to feel better. So I went to God and said, please forgive me for doing this when I was drinking. But when I stopped drinking, Karyn, I didn't have to go back to God for all the stupid stuff that I was doing. as you stop the South Carolina stuff, and I'm going to be very serious here, when you do your writing on a daily basis, you will stop judging any other drivers that aren't in what you believe doing what they should do. When you write it, when you see it on paper and you go, my Lord, 7 days out of the last 10, I've gotten frustrated with drivers. There's going to come a point, I can't tell you if it's going to be in a week, 2 weeks, or 6 months, you're going to get tired of asking for forgiveness. You're going to look at this and go, this is ridiculous. I'm asking for forgiveness, but I keep repeating my errors. It's me, David, that needs to change. God don't need to change. I need to change so I don't have to keep going back and ask for forgiveness again.
You know, that's such an interesting way of looking at that, why you need to forgive 70 times, 7 times. It doesn't mean it's 777 times, and then on 778, you're done.
You're fine.
But if you are truly asking for forgiveness, you would get tired of asking and you would see it change. But because we have 70 times, 7 times, that shows you that sometimes it might take a while before it gets through to us.
Oh, it takes, when we have long-standing patterns about traffic or addiction or emotional abuse or supremacy of any type whatsoever, when they're long-standing, it's going to probably take a while because they've been lodged in the subconscious and it becomes a knee-jerk reaction. That's how we know it's in the subconscious. When we say, okay, when I drive today, I'm not going to get upset with anyone else in traffic. And then 20 minutes later, we're going, well, that's because the pattern is so deep that you can say, I'm not going to do it. But what I've seen in my work, unless you're doing the writing on a daily basis, you're oblivious to how many times you're doing X that isn't healthy. But when you start writing down every time, that oblivion gets taken away, and now you're sitting in reality. And you pick up your sheet of paper and you go, this is the 5th day in a row I've judged traffic or people of color. And I'm a person of color. I'm white. I'm a person of color, for God's sake. Don't forget that. So if you're Black, Asian, Hispanic, and you judge whites, they're a person of color, write it down. If you're a white person and you're judging other different colored people or different sexual orientation, write it down. When you write it down and see the number of times you do it, you give yourself the greatest chance to heal. And that's what our show is about today. We want people to heal. Whatever you're carrying in your heart that is dark, that is not healthy, that is not loving, that is not filled with forgiveness, we need to let it go. And that's when you become a powerful voice for God, is when you're willing to let that small ego nonsense, judging people, go. Now, I am not on some kind of a stand here. I have my own issues. Still to this day, I know it's a shock for you to hear this, Karyn. I still have challenges in my life, right? I am so far from perfect. But listen, every time I do a show like this and we talk about topics that are very sensitive, it's keeping me grounded. It's making sure I don't buy into the nonsense put out by mass consciousness and society. Every time I get a chance to stand up for someone that isn't being treated well, I am reminding myself of the role that God has given me and asking me and everyone else in this world to do. And that is to come from a place of love, to forgive, come from a place of love, forgive. You may have to do it 777 times, and that's okay. If that's what it takes to get it, keep doing it.
And I think, and we've been talking like almost an hour, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I think it's important. If you look at the Bible, God is love. Every time God talks about himself, he talks about being the light, never the darkness. So if you have that darkness in your heart, if you have that hatred, that you need to know that that is not of God. God is love. God is light. God is everything good. What do they say in Philippians 4, I think 4:16, everything good, right, and perfect, and everything that is good. That's what we need to be focusing on. And if you have that darkness, know that it's not of God, because God is the light that shines on that darkness. God is the love that counters the hate. And if you're truly a Christian, if you are a Christ follower, then you need to know that God is love. Jesus is love and light.
You know, Ram Dass, a very famous spiritual teacher that had a huge influence in my life in the 80s, he passed away this year. But he said something really beautiful. In 1985, I'll never forget it. He said, everyone you meet, treat them like Jesus in drag.
Okay. And that's true. We need to treat everyone like Jesus, meaning that we approach people with kindness, with love, with understanding. And if we see someone being wronged, we stand up.
Yeah.
We go for it because that's what God would have done. That's what Jesus did. He
Absolutely.
went into that temple and turned over those tables when he saw that the money changers were not doing the right thing.
That's
he helped that Samaritan when nobody else would have. When the priest and the follower of the priest walked by that Samaritan, it was Jesus that helped that Samaritan.
That's right.
Jesus did that. Not because he didn't say, oh, that's a Samaritan, dirty, nasty Samaritan, let's ignore him. He went and helped no matter who you were, no matter what your belief was. Jesus was about countering oppression and injustice because that's what love does.
Karyn, if there's a final thing I'd just like to add, I think is so important. If people want to start being more Christ-like, more God-like, it starts by looking in everyone's eyes, in my opinion. The homeless, the Black, the Hispanic, the Latino, the white. I really believe if we start focusing on people's eyes, we're going to start seeing a love that we've never seen. And when you start to look at people in the eye, there's some people are going to push back. They're not going to be able to handle it because it's really intimate. When you look in someone's eyes, it's an intimate experience. It's no longer just a face and a body. You're into the soul. The eyes are a reflection of the soul. I tell people who are uncomfortable with the homeless is just look in their eyes.
You know, it's funny you would mention that because my church, every first Friday, we go down to the homeless center and feed the homeless. But this past Friday, there weren't a lot of homeless people coming to the center. So one of the volunteers said, why don't we take this food to the homeless? And we drove maybe 2-3 blocks. And there was this whole huge tent community of homeless in Charlotte that I had no idea. I don't know where I thought the homeless came from, but I mean, they clearly have to live somewhere. But they had this whole tent community, and we walked around and we talked to them, and we found out what their needs really were, which surprisingly wasn't food.
Right.
There was tons of water, bottles of water that people had dropped off. But in COVID-19, they didn't have masks. They didn't have hand sanitizer. They needed clothes. We also had bags that we had packed for them that had toothpaste and toothbrushes and washcloths and socks. And those went more than the food did.
Wow.
And it was a really major experience talking to the homeless because so many people don't talk to the homeless.
That's right.
They don't connect with them. You want to pretend that they don't exist. You know, we prayed there was a veteran there. There was a man who had worked all day and was living in a tent community. There was one man, he was like, yeah, I could have got an apartment, but they would have made me give up my dog, and I couldn't do that. And,
Right.
you know, there were all sorts of people there, you know, and pretty much it hit me that that's what heaven is going to be like. There are all sorts of people. There were Black people, white people, Hispanic people. There were people in their right mind. There were people who maybe weren't in their right mind. There were people that loved their pets just like I love my crazy dog. There were all sorts of people there. And how little does it take for us to see them and not ignore them and not pretend that they're not there, but to just see them, because that's what Jesus would do. He didn't ignore certain people because they didn't meet his standards.
Yeah.
You know, God made everybody, including those homeless, and they deserve to be seen and acknowledged.
That's right.
And prayed for.
You know, the last time I was on your show, when we talked about the book Rockstar, Finding God's Purpose for Your Life, that book, if you remember, Karyn, was given to me by a homeless guy. The homeless man, I had given him $5. He was panhandling. And he said, I can't take this money without giving you something back. And I said, Mark, you don't need to give me. He was going through his knapsack. I go, Mark, whatever's in your knapsack, it's more important for you than it is for me. I don't need anything. Take the money, use it for your highest good. He said, no, I can't. He goes, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make up a story. And he made up the story Rockstar. He told me the story in 5 minutes. Of course, I embellished it and made it into a complete book. But he told me his version of it in 5 minutes. I looked at it, I go, Mark, that was an incredible story. Now, he was a guy, a homeless man, not in his right mind. He was riddled with addiction. He couldn't remember. I saw him every day of the week. He never remembered me from day to day. And yet he gave me a book that became a #1 bestseller. And I give him credit in the front of the book. Now, here's something interesting. The day after he gave me that story, I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to Mark, but a homeless man gave me a story for my $5 bill that became a book, and it's touched thousands of people's lives, Karyn. So I think what we're talking about today, being more Christ-like, is being more open to everyone, looking in people's eyes, and being an example, a representative of God. That's what we're talking about.
And that's where we're going to end it, because you just summed up everything so perfectly with that statement. When we want to be Christ-like, we cannot have hate in our heart. And we do need to look for and ask for forgiveness. Look at our hearts for what we need forgiveness for, and then specifically ask for that forgiveness, whether it's for racism, road rage, or whatever it is. So I just want to thank you, David, so much for dropping by again.
Yes.
So thank you so much. His book Rockstar is available on Amazon. It's a quick read. I got it and I read it, and it's a surprising story. Why that rock became a star, you want to know.
That's right.
But until next time, have a blessed and wonderful day. Until next time, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.